everyone. Welcome to our podcast, Discovering the Architecture Middle Path. Um, as usual, Sanjiva is joining me, and we have a guest today as well.
Hi, welcome back. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Rania to the podcast. Rania is our Chief AI Officer. And before joining WS Sugar about 8.5 ago, she was the CIO and Chief Data Officer of an AgTech company called Inari. And before that was in IBM Research for a long time, I think about 20 years almost. And I think the last role was as head of AI engineering at IBM Research, working on Watson in various forms. And Rania has a PhD in computer science from Stuttgart University, studied at MIT. And in fact, I met Rania first when she was an undergrad at MIT. And she did a bachelor's master's combined program called the 6A program. She was an intern in our group when I was at IBM Research. So Rania, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Welcome to the podcast, Rania. So, last episode we spoke about agents, and we digging deep into what are agents, because there are a lot of conversations happening about agents and misconceptions. So we cleared that, and we promised that we are going to talk about the next level, that is the agentic enterprise. And three of us actually, we wrote a blog a month before. And if you are interested, you can go and read it. We'll put the link to the blog post with the video. So Rania, why don't we start with the defining the agentic enterprise, because I think that's the topic, and there are different definitions for this as well. So in my definition, it's basically rethinking about the enterprise and the enterprise architecture again by treating agents as first-class citizens. So that's how I view this. But I think since you are in this domain for a long time, it's better that to get a clear definition from you.
Yeah, this is a very interesting time that we're in, because the shift we're seeing with Gen AI and then specifically with agents, when you add the ability to take action, is that these kind of probabilistic and potentially autonomous applications are becoming part and parcel of your enterprise architecture, right? They're going to be running inside your systems alongside your human workers and alongside your digital applications. And also they will be using your software and they will be writing some of your code. That doesn't mean that all you will have is AI, but that these generative AI applications and agents are just going to be a first-class citizen now in what you are running and how it's used. And we need to design for it all the way up the stack.
Yeah. So I think going back to some time back, like I think we had this experience with these kind of autonomous agents, right, Sanjiva? Even we watched this movie called Knight Rider a long time back, and he had a partner. And then even in Iron Man, there's a agent called Jarvis. So we were experiencing this thing for a while. Sometimes there's a human in the loop, but sometimes when the person get in trouble, agent operates automatically as well, autonomously as well. So I think it was there in the fictions, but now it is becoming real. And not only one agent now, it's kind of becoming 10 to 100 agents running inside the enterprise. I think that is where the agentic enterprise is becoming pretty important for the enterprises.
And I think there's two things, right? So the concept of agents is not new in any sense. The concept of autonomous computing, of like computing the flow of interactions or the sequence that your program will do on the fly is also not new. A lot of these things have been going for a long time. When we all worked on the semantic web, remember there was so much work about reasoning with if you have enough preconditions and post conditions, could you go from an intention to a sequence of API calls at the time, right? To accomplish the goal. I think what the big unlock here was two things around what's happened in the generative AI space and foundation models. One was this big leap in natural language processing and natural language understanding, that now anybody can specify the intent and you don't need to do a lot of definitions. It's just natural language. And the other thing is this, the ability of using these models to be able to reason and plan. And finally, it's about these agents getting now, these capabilities now having wide access to act and take action, call APIs, do use tools, etc. I think it's that combination that's made them very interesting now and let the take off. Right?
I think, Rania, your point is the key one, that agentic, the word agents, I remember writing papers with the word agent in them in 1990s, early 90s, right? Yeah. And that was, by then it was already there. So the key point is the power of LLMs to introduce language processing to basically normal level, essentially human level, right? And then the fact that we are now coupled with the ability to execute, and then language processing is always a non-deterministic decision point, and then coupled with execution, now you have the ability for agents to act. So I think the step that we are seeing, the process that we're seeing is first agents become sort of second-class participants in enterprise processes, enterprise workflows. And you see this with coding agents, right? You see, Andre Karpathy writing, and there was Boris, what's his name, the Cloud Code guy, but how he has like 10 agents running code, coding agents, right? Those are sort of second class. They're all his responsibility in the end. But then you also get to the point of when agents become first class actors in the enterprise. And you see this kind of extreme story of companies being built only with agents, no people. Or the CEO writes up a bunch of agents, and there are now Git repos saying, here's the entire org structure as a bunch of agents. Here's a marketing agent, here's a sales agent, here's a finance agent, there's a people ops agent, well, HR agent, not your, I don't know what, sorry, AR agent, agentic resources agent, etc. So I think it's an interesting transition also, because there are these sort of agent first companies versus, say, a company that's been around already, which has people, and we have, we are not trying to get rid of all people and just replace as agents. So there is a sort of balance between this agents as first class actors in the business versus agents as secondary supporting actors.
Yeah. So I think now there are three levels here, right? One is like you write an agent for fun, or you write an agent for personal use and just use it. And then the second thing is you start a new company, more kind of greenfield, and then writing set of agents. That's a scenario that Sanjiva explained. I think the challenging one is the third one. Now you have a well-established enterprise, and you have systems, you have data, and you have people. Now, how you are bringing agents into the ecosystem is the challenging part. So that's where the concept of agentic enterprise going to be critical for these enterprises.
Yes, absolutely. And there are many kinds of agents, right? So you could have a personal agent on your laptop. And then what's even more interesting, I think, is there are agents that are just running within your platform, within your system, triggered on events, or maybe working with many people, right, to accomplish different goals. And then it gets really exciting, but it also gets really important for you as a company to know what these agents are doing and to make sure that, they're not going off the rails, and to the extent possible, be able to oversee and react and control their life cycle. And
Right.
we have to remember also that agents are, and AI in general, right? It is not doing anything unless it is connected to your data, to your digital capabilities, to your people, right? So that's super important to keep in mind.
Yeah, so I think for agents, I mean, one of the key parts of being an agent is the ability to act. But before ability to act, there was a precondition, which is the ability to get data, get the right information to the language model so it can take your enterprise data, because the foundation model doesn't have access to any of your enterprise data. So you always have to bring the enterprise data as part of the context that you give to the model. And then you need to decide what to act. And that basically means make API calls, run a command, log into a website, various kinds of things. So in order for an agent to actually be autonomously executing, it needs the good old things of how do I get information out of the enterprise in a safe way, in a compliant way, and all that, and then have it processed through the LLM, and then decide, okay, now I'll turn around and make a call to this thing or run this program or send a message to somebody else or trigger another agent, all this kind of stuff. All of which require actual architecture underneath, because otherwise the agent, its toy agent will work on your machine, but you take it to the real world, it won't work.
Yeah. So I think that is kind of guiding us to the next topic as well, because there's a lot of conversation about agents and then the technology behind that. At the same time, there's a big conversation about the success rate. And we see various numbers from different kind of research done. But what we are hearing, the success rate is not that great. Like those things might be running in the low environments, but there's less production grade agents are running inside the enterprise. So that is what we are hearing. And from the architect's point of view, that can be a real challenge as well, because end of the day, you need to bring these agents to into production and then have a business impact by bringing them into the production. So that's kind of a big conversation happening these days.
And I think everyone is now convinced there is every ROI. The leaders are running really fast and getting a lot of value, also breaking a bunch of things. But in some application spaces with lower risk, that's okay potentially, right? But they're running really fast, and then some of the challenges are about how do you get like speed with scale and do it responsibly and safely. That's really the challenge, right? It's not that people are not convinced there's ROI or you can't get something to production. It's just doing it reliably, repeatably, and at scale, and moving at the speed of which this domain is moving. That's where it gets really difficult right now, because we don't really have yet very robust, established programming models, middleware, building blocks, like all the scaffolding around these computational workloads to do that, like we do have for deterministic software already, or even just for models themselves. I believe like over the last 10, 15 years, we've gotten much better at integrating endpoints that are probabilistic, like a deep learning model or a foundation model into an application, but agents add a whole other layer of complexity about that because they can act and they are deciding what they're doing, right?
Yeah. It's a domain specific as well, because different kind of business domains have different kind of compliance requirements. Even I can remember way back when algorithmic trading came into the picture, it took a while to pick up because to meet all these different type of regulatory standards and then compliance requirements had in the financial sector.
And I think I wrote an article recently on data and AI, AI and Data Insider, maybe last year, talking a bit about this, like how do you assign accountability and how do you maintain the safety of these systems? And I think it's important to understand that happens at 4 levels, and our big focus as architects and technologists maybe is we're very focused on one of these 4. But first, there's a lot of research and science happening in safe and responsible AI in academia and some of the big labs, right? Second is there's a lot of legislation and policy coming up. This is like Europe's AI Act or the Japanese AI Safety Institute work, etc. Third is the business and operational model and the processes around these. Like some companies are rethinking the role of HR and whether HR should also manage agents. Some people are doing different things. Some of the things Sanjiva was mentioning before. How do we're discussing a lot about how do we what is the new standardization around like the DevOps flows and which kind of agents are included for every kind of project that we're doing in development across the company. So this is all around, it's not about the software, it's about all the people and the processes around it. And finally, what we're talking about here, which is the AI software and hardware platform advances, right? That you need to be able to support these things, right? And I think a lot of our focus here, we're not really going to be talking about all the other things. I think they also are around you and getting to scale and production readiness and governance. But we're really focused on what is the technical foundations required for that, right, today.
Yeah, I think from a platform perspective, at least from a W0 perspective, we focus on building middleware, right? That's what we do. Middleware meaning how do we enable the organizations to become an agentic enterprise while offloading as much of the sort of the halo around the agent and the infrastructure you need not to be able to safely operate an agentic environment. And but in general, I mean, ignoring the WSO because we don't really talk specifically about WSO services in the general concepts, right? In any environment, to make agents real, you have to have well-governed core infrastructure with these APIs or identity. If you don't have well-structured core infrastructure, you can't make agents actually act in the real world. You should do a little open shore demo, but you can't take it real. I think that's a key thing that people have to understand as architects, that if you are trying to convert your organization to adopt agentic execution, agents that act, agents that monitor, agents that send triggers, etc., then you have to make sure the core foundation is also rock solid. Otherwise, you can't access it, right?
Yeah. I think there are some fundamental stuff we spoke in the enterprise architecture about the composability, discoverability, and that's where these API integrations are coming and playing a role. And then there are a new set of terms coming like tools, skills, but then again, underneath those terms, the fundamental stuff Sanjiva explained are there, and that is how we can make these accessible capabilities for the agents, for them to find and then execute by itself or behalf of a human. So I think that's where this foundational layer is pretty important when we are looking at the agentic enterprise.
And sometimes it's not acting on behalf of a human, right? It has its own role and its own identity.
Yes.
And then that's where agent identity really comes in. That has been in a maturing space to say that the agent has its own identity and that has to be separated from the human with ability to delegate, right?
Yeah.
Interesting question would be, at some point, can you lay off agents?
They seem to protect each other. I don't know if you saw, there was a paper recently from Dawn Song and her team. They ran a simulation and the agent tried to protect each other from being shut down.
Yeah. So we should talk about this concept of an agent control plane. I think that is how everything comes together in the business. You need a way to kind of, keep
if you think,
and be able to shut it down. It goes out of whack. There was a fun video I saw on X, because you see on X, you don't know if it's true or not, right? But it was about a robot in a restaurant in China, and something goes wrong and it starts dancing and moving its arms around out of control. So of course it's hitting people, right? And it's a robot and they're trying to stop it and they can't stop it. Finally, they're kind of drag it out of the way. So I don't know if it's true or not, but that's a question of agentic control plane, not quite. Or you want control.
Yeah, I think when we think of agents, your first instinct may be that, this is just code and I already have ways to deploy code. I have ways to observe it. I have ways to check its performance. So why is this so new, right? Why don't I just use whatever I already use for my applications? And the challenge is that these things, they look a bit like traditional applications, but they're really not, because of the things we talked about, right? So their life cycle is different. We also talk about the same stages. You develop them, you deploy them, etc. But the way that you test them, the way that you update them when they're not performing correctly, and the damage they can cause if they go off the rails, these are very different from what we see with deterministic applications that we have been for many decades evolving the middleware stacks for. And that is where this concept of an agent control plane comes in, or an agent management layer, where what we're looking at is saying, okay, someone is specifying what the agent intent is, what it's supposed to do, what tools it can use, and so on. But I need someone to see my agents that are running, understand what they're doing, evaluate their performance, and react when things are looking like they're not going well, either by improving my agent, or potentially, if it's doing something really off the rails, automatically shut it down with a kill switch. That would be really helpful. And what we're seeing there is, just to give an example, right? an agent that's running, to be able to know how it's doing and if it's doing well, right? You want to do what's called evals. And these are looking at certain metrics. Some are very well-known ways of evaluating the agent. So you're looking at the traces of the agents, its interactions, what it's trying to do, how it's reasoning, and you're trying to see if that's going well or not. So there are standard things like, is it hallucinating, or is it saying toxic, doing things that may be toxic, or is it stuck in an infinite loop running up your budget? And then there could be also domain-specific evals that you add, like you were mentioning before, Asanka, right? Like if you're in the healthcare space, could be very specific to that. Or we just had an example where one of the things we've been doing as we built out our Agentic enterprise in WSO2 is we have this Unitree dog that Sanjiva got excited about and bought for us to experiment with. And we have an agent running inside, we have an agent there for the dog to operate. And what we had done for it, we had an evaluation on the sequence of the tool sequences that agents use. And we used a generic one. And it looked like this dog was performing very poorly. But what we realized is that it's normal for that thing to stop and take a picture, turn, stop and take a picture, turn, stop. It's doing that in a very fast loop. So it looks like it's stuck, but it's very normal for that kind of physical AI deployment and application, right? So back to what you're saying, right? There's standard ways to check things, but sometimes and often you're going to have to adapt and be able to plug in those different evals that are specific to your use case. So that's one part, right? It's like I need to understand what it's doing and I need to make sure it's doing okay when it's running and keep my eyes on it. And then the next part is I want to potentially be able to configure and monitor all its inbound and outbound interactions with the world. And that's where Sanjiva mentioned a little bit around the agent halo. So we think about it as kind of like the scaffolding around the agent that help it to operate as robustly as possible. And that's where you want to do things like you may want to configure which LLMs it uses. You want to maybe put different guardrails or checks on those interactions with these LLMs or foundation models that it's talking to. Those could be like enterprise-wide guardrails, like you don't want any proprietary data to leave your enterprise, or they could be specific to the agent, right? Like let's say for this specific agent, I really care to do semantic caching, but maybe not for everything else. I don't need to do that. And finally, you need to be able to say, who is this agent and what does it have access to? So this goes back to the concept of identity before, so that when it's taking actions and doing things, you can manage the authorization and the permissions and also have an audit log and know what happened. So it is this combination of, the configuration of all of its interactions and understanding what it's doing and being able to control its life cycle as a result. That is very, very interesting and helps you manage and be able to be sleeping better when you know that there's a lot of agents running around inside your systems.
Yeah, I think Sanjay made a good comment about can we fire an agent. So that gives me a really good analogy for the agent control plane and the what we call the agent management platforms. So now in real world, like we have people operations. So traditionally we call HR to manage employees, right? So similarly, now we need to have a way to manage the agents. I think that's where the agent control plane coming, and we can enforce the operational aspects like the observability, audits, and even agent ID control through that control plane, and then manage these agents. Even this eval, like if you look at, we have evaluations, right? Like whether we behave, and then we are providing output based on the goal set. The same thing for the agents as well. We set a goal, and then we need to evaluate it and see whether it is meeting the goal and providing that the desired output based on the goals and the context that we set.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's also the concept of agent control plane is often realized in an organization using a set of tools. Rania mentioned about being able to manage LLM calls. So that's what the tool for that today is called an AI gateway. Right? And you also want to manage the agent's ability to invoke other things that would be like an MCP hub or an MCP gateway. So like that. And then of course, there's observability, which is using traces and so forth to kind of evaluate, to record what the agent is doing. And you need an evaluation framework. So there's a set of things that you have to put together to form this agent control plane. Otherwise, you won't be able to know whether you can fire them. It's really like in people operations, you can't fire people randomly. If you have to let go of somebody, you have to have fair process and give them a chance to improve. All of that stuff. Otherwise, it's not correct.
And the interesting thing here is that what we've been seeing, because we've had the components for a while, for about a year now, we've been having AI gateway, agent identity, ability to build agents in our products, and you see a lot of those also emerging from other vendors. The interesting thing that we found is when you start to look at the agent, it's still very hard, even if you have all the pieces and you can have an observability framework. When you put it together, it's like 1 + 1 is 3, right? So I'll give an example what I mean by that. We talked a bit about the agent identity, right? So in identity systems, you can have an entity registered like an agent, and then, if it's misbehaving, you could say, okay, I'm going to remove it. I'm going to revoke all its tokens and so on, right? The problem is if this is an agent's going to keep trying to accomplish its goal no matter what. And if all these calls keep failing, it's going to try other things and other ways to get to its goal. So if you just take away its tokens, but you don't stop its runtime, then it's going to be racking up costs while you're sleeping, calling out to the LLMs over and over, trying to find other ways to get to its goal. So that's why when you put those pieces all together, it's not about putting the pieces together. It's about how do I put the agent at the center and design for its life cycle and how I can manage that. And then those become the tools that help me to do that.
Yeah. So I think the interesting point now is where to start. This is where some of the architects are struggling because there's a big push coming from the business side, and they need to deliver something. And I think different organizations are taking different approaches based on their maturity of the current digital infrastructure, because that is a clear dependency. But then again, not every organization are at the same maturity level, right? But then again, now there's no time to become digital and then become agentic. I think most of the organizations, they have to leapfrog to the agentic enterprise. So I think it's better to kind of give a few tips for the architects. From my point of view, I think the main thing is about a strategy, right? Like there should be a strategy for the organization and then a policy about how and what they are planning to use because of that regulatory and compliance requirements. And then kind of define a priority as well, because you can't do everything, and where to start, and then how you can make an impact, whether you are taking a low risk approach or you are taking a high impact approach. So I think those are the things we need to consider while we are working on the technical aspect of the problem.
And I think key point with that is using agents in development. The software engineering side of the company using agents is kind of a relatively well-established process now. There are lots of tools attached to GitHub and so on, right? So Cloud Code is amazing. Codex is amazing. There's a bunch of things that are really good at helping you write code using agents. But when you go to other domains of the business, you go to legal or finance or operations or marketing or sales, those tools are still evolving. I think that's where companies have to figure out, like, how do I get that going? And that's when that strategy part you mentioned really matters. And what are we trying to achieve with AI? Every top down, the answer is how many agents are we running now? I get this question from our board. How many agents are we running?
This reminds me, Sanjiva, when the time of DevOps, remember those days? I was in IBM and we had these DevOps champions that were helping people. And there was something about I remember like we wanted people to, we're trying to get a sense of like, are people like how productive or how effective is the software engineer, or is the person on the team? And then people could optimize whatever you measure, people optimize for it, and it changes behavior. So if you were looking at, the worst thing you could do is say, oh, I'm going to count the number of GitHub commits you're making. Right. And then you don't get better code, right? Ideally, you're measuring better code, but you use that as a proxy measure. And all you get is now the people that are maybe having some struggles, right? They may, to hack the system, start to just commit every little tiny change, right? Then you have a lot of commits. You're the leader of commits. That doesn't mean you're the best engineer there, right?
Yeah, and I mean, similar, I think you started DevOps, right? So we've heard of companies where their measure of DevOps success was how many times a day you can push to production.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is, well, that's nice that you can push 79 times a day to production, but what kind of business are you in that you need to change your system 79 times a day?
And I feel like this is, it's interesting, right? We get what we measure and we measure what we can.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's the other way around. We measure what we can, so we get what we measure. And then that drives behavior. But number of agents, I think the idea is, measuring like how effective are the agents and how many agents you should have. I think that's an interesting ability or an interesting need. But I'd like to focus back to what does it need to get these things first to just run reliably, right? Or more reliably. They're always going to be probabilistic. So it's not like you're always going to know. It's kind of like with people, right? They might do things and surprise you a lot one day, but...
So just to come back to the topic of what guidance we should give to architects. The key thing I think is architects have to be the anchor of sanity for AI. The buzzword mania around AI and the hype around AI is infinite. And every morning you feel like you're an idiot because so much has come out while you're sleeping. And in reality, it doesn't work like that. It's always slow. So I think having that first principles reasoning, I think one of the first things we talked about in this podcast, I'm going to keep asking why to really understand what the real value proposition of whatever one of these words are. Then you start figuring out how to actually get it into a useful value. Otherwise, you become another one of these loud people who are like, going down the road saying, monsters are coming kind of thing, and not having constructive impact on the business, which is really the job of the architect.
100%. Yeah. So I think we spoke a lot and we can discuss about this topic another hour or so. So I encourage everybody to read our blog because some of the points we missed here, we spoke in our blog post. So thanks, Rania, for joining. And it's always a pleasure, Sanjiva, discussing these kind of topics with you. So we will come up with another topic related to the Agentic Enterprise during next episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.